welcome everyone to this exclusive live webinar on human trafficking in the U.S. This is what every parent needs to know. My name is Debbie Carlitis, and I'm the podcast host of the Moms for America podcast, and I am also the vice president there at Moms for America. Moms for America is thrilled to be collaborating today with Enough is Enough, a national nonprofit organization fighting to make the internet safer for children and families since 1994. They have been doing this for a very long time, and it is amazing what the work they are doing. We so appreciate the work that they are doing to make America safer for our children. Right here, I do want to mention their two websites so all of our participants can check out their information later after the webinar. Their website is enough.org. That is enough.org. And also internetsafety101.org. Again, that is internetsafety101.org. That is the information for Enough is Enough. A little bit about Moms for America. We are also a nonprofit national organization. We have a network of over 500,000 moms, about 500,000 moms in our network all across the country. We are mothers uniting together, reclaiming our country for truth, family, freedom, and the Constitution. Our website is momsforamerica.us. Again, that is momsforamerica.us. Please visit our website as well and join the movement. All right, well, before we get started with our panel experts, which are amazing, by the way, we have a couple of quick announcements. I know we have a lot of folks on. We had over 1,000 registrars. So this is a very important topic, clearly. There will be a question and answer time at the end of the webinar. So please feel free during the webinar to submit your questions in the Q&A function area. Hannah will be looking through those, compiling those, and we will try to get to your questions at the end of the webinar as time allows. Again, go ahead, submit your questions, and we will go ahead and discuss those at the end of the webinar. Also, I know a lot of you will be asking, how do we get a recording of this? We will be emailing all our registrants a recording of today's webinar so you can share this recording with your family and your friends, and also probably even watch this a couple of times. All righty, so hopefully everybody has joined us at this point. I do want to go ahead and get started and respect everyone's time. Thank you again for joining us here on the webinar. I know we have a lot of mothers and we have fathers. Basically, we are all Americans, and we are extremely concerned about the clear and present dangers of the internet, sexual predators, and human trafficking. I am so glad, I'm so honored to be joined by Enough is Enough President and CEO Donna Rice Hughes. She has been a friend of Moms for America for years. We appreciate her information. We have utilized it with our moms over the past years. Well, under her leadership as Enough is Enough, they pioneered the internet safety movement in America in the early 90s, and it remains on the front line today. Donna is an author, a speaker, and an Emmy Award-winning producer. Welcome, Donna. Thank you so much for doing this webinar for us. We just so appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Deb. And I am such a big fan of Moms for America, and we could not think of a better partner to join us in talking about what is happening and the national conversation that has just got everybody
exploded.
Talking.
Yes.
Exploded because of Sounds of Freedom, starring Jim Caviezel. So we thank you. We welcome all your audience of moms across America. I am one of those moms and a grandmom. and I also want to welcome the Enough is Enough audience and our other partners who have asked their people to join us. So welcome, everybody.
Welcome, everybody.
We've got a lot to talk about in a short period of time, but we're going to get started right away. But as we mentioned, this film has got a lot of buzz going, and I'm sure you're talking about it and probably have a lot of questions, which is why we're here. So we're going to shine a light on the sex trafficking of children, specifically how child predators and traffickers use the internet to groom and target children, the link between online pornography, child sex abuse material, and most importantly, how do we prevent these crimes against children? We are joined today by my colleague and a member of the Enough is Enough team, Bill Wolf. Bill is the perfect person to be on this call because he is an expert in combating human trafficking. Bill is a former detective, and he received the Presidential Medal for extraordinary efforts to combat human trafficking in persons under the Trump administration. He also served as the Human Trafficking Programs Director at DOJ and was a special advisor to the White House. Bill, welcome. In response to this film, what are you seeing? I'm sure you're hearing all kinds of things. And if, as part of your answer, could you also define for us what is human trafficking and how bad is it in the United States?
Yeah, well, thank you, Donna, and it's a pleasure to be here with everyone today. I know this is not the most the happiest of topics, but it's really important topic for us to be talking about. I think one of the challenges when it comes to the issue of human trafficking is that we paint a very accurate picture. Now, I appreciate the film and the awareness that is being brought to this particular issue. And I think the film, really highlights what's happening overseas. But I think something that's important to remember is that human trafficking is happening here. It's happening in our own backyard. Donna, as you mentioned, I'm a former police officer. And the first time that I encountered human trafficking, I had no idea what it was. I was a detective. I was a gang detective. Working, many of you may have heard of MS-13 and the type of horrible gang that they are. And we were investigating the case. We cultivated an informant, inserted the informant into the gang, and we said, listen, we want to know what types of crimes is the gang involved in? How are they making their money? You see, so often we kind of come to these situations with sort of these preconceived notions of what something really is. And so, of course, I was expecting the informant to come back to me and tell me about guns and drugs and violent crimes and things of that nature. And he calls one night and he describes a situation where the gangs are moving these girls into what he described as prostitution. Now, I was a police officer right outside of Washington, D.C., very affluent part of the country. And so we really didn't think anything of it. And the informant calls one night and says, look, I'm really uncomfortable. This girl they have out here tonight looks very young. And so we went out, we did our due diligence, and we interdicted the situation and found out that, in fact, it was a 16-year-old girl. And still at that point had no idea what we were actually dealing with. We went to the prosecutor's office the next morning. We explained what we found. And the prosecutor looked at me and my partner. He goes, you've got a great human trafficking case. And our response was, what the heck is human trafficking? Mm-hmm. And the reason I highlight that is because so many professionals, frontline professionals, don't understand that it's happening right in front of us. And unfortunately, I've spoken to too many moms that have not realized that their son or daughter was being drawn into an exploitive situation. So, Donna, you asked, what is human trafficking? I think the most simplest way that we can describe it is compelling a person to engage in commercial sex or forced unfair labor. And one thing I really want to highlight about that is, for so long in our country, we have described this issue of commercial sex as prostitution. And prostitution assumes that the person engaged in that type of activity is a consenting participant. But we've learned that the reality of those that are in the commercial sex trade are actually being forced to do it. And they are victims of human trafficking.
Donna, what about your reaction to the movie? I know this has been something that you've been championing for decades and with your organization. And it does. I know that the film does highlight across the sea, not in America, it takes place in a foreign country. But here in Illinois, we just had a huge sex ring that got busted here in Illinois. So same thing, just a different situation, different location.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I'm really glad that the film is doing so well and that people are talking about it because, as you know, Bill and I have really devoted our careers to preventing this
Yeah.
type of thing, and on Bill's side to stopping it from a law enforcement side. And but one of the things I so appreciated about the film is it actually puts a face
Right.
to the problem. And I don't know anybody that could walk away from that film and not fall in love with these children
Yeah.
and be absolutely appalled that people are buying and selling kids like this, innocent children, to perform sex acts over and over and over again every single day. And that, in fact, is the reality. And in fact, at the end of the film, they made the point that the heroes are the children.
Yeah.
Because that's true. Those who survive this. Now, trafficking is the second largest criminal enterprise in the world. It generates $150 billion globally. And in the US alone, $9.8 billion. Now, in the US, in 2022, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children received more than 19,000 reports of child sex trafficking in every single state in the United States. And so, like Bill said, this is happening in our own backyard. In fact, Bill and I just did a webinar and interviewed a wonderful mom whose child was in a school where I live in Fairfax County, Virginia, 13 years old, was being trafficked, recruited during school by quote unquote her boyfriend, turned out to be in a gang, got her into a sexual situation, filmed it, used it to coerce her into into trafficking, basically, while she's living at home.
Unreal.
While she's living at home. So this is happening. And that's why we're here, because yes, it is happening overseas, but it's happening here. It's happening in your neighborhood. And we want to educate, equip, and empower you to recognize the signs and to protect your own children.
And I think that's what Sound of Freedoms is doing. It's heightening the awareness. The discussion is happening. It's now a topic where people never talked about. Now we are. But Bill, over to you. I know you referred to a little bit of some of the misconceptions about human trafficking, or some of the myths. Can you really dig into that for us? Because I think unless we're involved in this industry, like you are fighting it, we don't really understand it completely. How could we?
Yeah, and it's a massive industry, right? You
Yeah.
know, $150 billion worldwide, 9.8 billion here alone in the US. But you're right, there's a lot of myths and misconceptions. When I first got started, there was the movie Taken, and that was kind of our
Right.
our go-to, and say, you know what, it's anything but what you're seeing in that particular movie. Here in the US, I think some of the most common myths or misconceptions that we see is, first and foremost, we think this is something that only impacts foreign nationals, right? There's a lot of discussion on what's happening on the border right now. Certainly those individuals that are coming across the border, young people coming across the border, are very vulnerable to trafficking.
Right.
But that's not the majority of the trafficking that we see here in our country. The majority of the trafficking, in fact, our own US State Department estimates that more than 80% of victims of human trafficking in the United States are US citizens. And the most targeted age group for sex trafficking are teenagers. So this is something that I think, we really have to be aware of, is it's our kids that are at risk. It's our kids that are being targeted by these predators, in various different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Another myth or misconception is that these young people are being abducted or kidnapped into these situations. Very commonly in the United States, in fact, there was a study that came out of the state of Florida that suggested that 90% of all minors that are being trafficked are actually living at home, sleeping in their own beds, and attending school every day.
That is mind-blowing.
Yeah.
That is mind-blowing.
And I think, and that's, I think, it really starts to paint a picture for what we're seeing, right? This issue of exploitation that's happening, because traffickers, really what they're doing is they're building relationships with their intended victims, right? And so they think that they're in a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, or they think that it's somebody that they can trust, that really is there at the end of the day just to exploit them, to profit off of that individual as a human being. I think, a few other myths or misconceptions is that it only affects impoverished communities because they think that it's money driven. In fact, traffickers will tell you that they prefer to target teenagers that come from the suburbs, middle to upper class homes. So again, just because we live outside of urban areas does not mean that we're immune to these situations. And that kind of leads to the last one that I really wanted to highlight today. And that is that if we think that the most common myth or misconception is that human trafficking is not happening in my community. And I'm here to tell you as a former detective that worked human trafficking all across the United States, it is happening.
It is, right.
It's absolutely happening. And I think, Donna can speak very specifically to how the internet is that mechanism by which traffickers are targeting, scouting out, and recruiting intended victims.
Tell us about that, Donna, the internet, because I think all of us too are just so concerned about it. And this is again where you have been shining the light in the darkness on the internet.
Yeah, that's right, Deb. Thank you. Yeah, since 2000, traffickers have recruited 55% of their victims online. That's according to the Federal Human Trafficking Report of 2020. And this makes a lot of sense when you think about it. In fact, how often did you hear about trafficking and sex trafficking specifically prior to the internet? The internet is a wonderful tool, obviously, but anytime a child has access to the internet, you have access to all of the good, all of the bad, all of the great content, all of the bad and illegal content, good people, safe people, and criminals. And so where kids play, predators prey, Prey. Now, since we started in 94, our focus is protecting children from sexual exploitation online, pornography, sexual predators, etc. Keep in mind, a trafficker is a sexual predator. So they are using the same grooming techniques that a predator would use, a predator who may not then be engaging or drawing that child into commercial sex trafficking. So the grooming process is very, it's a process. Predators know exactly how to manipulate young kids.
Right, they're pros, right?
Oh, right, they're pros, and they're good at it. They are good at gaining their trust. They are good at drawing them in however they can. I interviewed a convicted sex offender, not a trafficker, a sex offender in a high security prison. And I named him John Doe to protect his anonymity. And I said, John, how did you get these kids to trust you? And he said, in the course of a day, I could be talking to 10 to 20 or more kids a day in a part of the grooming process. And he would say, if I was talking to a young boy who wanted to be talking or interacting with a girl, then he would grab a picture of a girl he thought that boy would be attracted to, and he would be that girl. And that's what they do. They disguise themselves. They don't come out. Most kids are savvy enough now to go, someone came out and said, hey, I want you to take your clothes off and pose, and then I'm going to use it to blackmail you. And if you don't do what I say, then I'm going to come. And they isolate them. And then they get them to these sexual situations that they can then use to blackmail them, to coerce them, to get them to do other things, to draw them into the sexual behavior that is their intention to begin with. And let me just say this, kids have 24/7 access. And with respect to grooming, 40% of kids, last poll I saw, 40% of kids in grades 4 to 8 are talking to strangers regularly online. Because once they've talked to someone once or twice, that person in their vulnerable mind is a friend. Yes.
And they get that trust going, and this is where it gets so dangerous. Bill, you talk about what traffickers look like. It's such a mouthful there. 3 things, right? Accessibility, suggestibility, and vulnerability. Could you go over that with us? Because this is where they're finding our kids. This is how they're getting them. And this is what we have to be talking to our children about on a regular basis. These 3 things.
That's exactly right, Deb. And I think that's really important to understand. Everyone wants to understand, okay, what whose child is at risk? Who are the traffickers targeting, right? What is the classic demographic? The reality is that trafficking cuts across all races, ethnicities, genders, socioeconomic classes. It doesn't matter. Traffickers only look for three things, like you mentioned: accessibility, suggestibility, and vulnerability. So what do we mean by those? Well, Donna talked a lot about accessibility, right? Where is it that the traffickers can access our young people? Most common method, online, right? They're also, they're sending people into our schools. They're sending people to recruit at shopping malls and movie theaters, places where young people hang out. But most commonly, it is going to be on these electronic devices that they're communicating with them: phones, computers, online gaming, etc. Once they have access to this individual, and as Donna mentioned, right, it's unfiltered access, right?
Right.
When we were growing up, to keep the bad guys out, we would lock our doors and windows at night. Well, you can lock your doors and windows all day long. The bad guys are now coming in through the internet.
Right into your
So
home.
that's right, right
Literally,
into your
right into your
home
home.
at all hours of the night, right? So they look for accessibility, and then they look for who is suggestible. And what do we mean by that? Well, it means, how easy is it for me as a trafficker to convince this young person that what I want them to do is normal or acceptable behavior? And I think that really goes to culture today, right? We look at the porn culture, we look at the over-sexualization of society today, and that is really reinforcing what the traffickers are doing. It's making it much easier for the traffickers to manipulate people into these situations, to really be thinking about, that this is okay, or this is normal in some sort of way. And then the last thing that they look for is vulnerability. Any vulnerability that they can take advantage of. And I think that's so critically important to understand, right? We don't regularly share our vulnerabilities. Deb, if you ask me what my vulnerability is, I would not readily give that to you, right? Because then that gives you a little bit of leverage over me. I learned that mistake when I got married 23 years ago. But the reality is that our young people today are putting those vulnerabilities right on social media. They want to share with somebody. They want that attention. And all that is doing is giving the traffickers, the predators, an open window to climb through and manipulate our children.
Right. Don, I know you have a comment on this as well. What would you say to all this, and how they continually are using this internet? Your comments, please.
Yes, well, I think Bill really hit on everything. There is one point that I do want to mention about online gaming. This is really a trafficker and predator's dream come true. Why? Because they are engaging right off the get-go with whoever's playing that game to be a fellow gamer. So they're playing the game together. They've got video chat going oftentimes, even though we recommend you don't allow your child to use that. They've got audio chat going. There's voice masking technologies. So I find in talking to parents, sometimes they're just thinking smartphone and computer. I'm like, no. gaming device, alert, alert, alert. But I do want to talk about the role of the internet and all forms of exploitation, and how not just predators and traffickers are grooming kids, but the sexualized culture of the internet is actually setting a perfect storm stage for kids to be sexualized and to be drawn into very unhealthy and dysfunctional types of relationships. So let's just talk about what we call the cycle of abuse. None of this is happening in a vacuum. There is a link between trafficking, child pornography, which we're now calling child sex abuse images, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, and then hardcore pornography. I just want to stay on hardcore pornography for a minute, because this content, the majority of it that is out there today on the internet, is originating from the United States. Number one, it's illegal under federal obscenity laws, and common themes depict teen rape, incest, and about 90% of it depicts some type of violence against a female, either an adult female, 17, 18, that looks like they're 12 or 13, or actually, an adult. Now, kids are getting hooked on this. What is it doing? It's sexualizing them. It's
Sure.
making them think that this type of content that is now arousing them is acceptable, is normal, is adult. And so we are seeing, just to give you a data point here, that 58, I think it's 58% of kids under the age of 14 are consuming that type of content. And what is it doing? It is not only lowering their defenses, but they are now sexting as a rite of passage. In fact, polls have shown that kids, when you ask them about sexting, they think it's normal and it's the thing to do. So we call this a self-generated, basically child sex, images that the kids are producing themselves. So when they meet, quote unquote, a friend who could be a predator or a trafficker and not just a boyfriend or whatever else, it's easy for them just to strip, do whatever, and exchange these kinds of nudes.
Right. Yeah, the hypersexualized culture is just breeding grounds for children to be groomed and groomers to come in and just steal our hearts and minds of our children. Bill, what about the exploiting children in the physical world? We're talking a lot about the internet, but what about in the communities, in the areas? I know you talked a little bit about this earlier, but I'd like you to talk about that as well.
Absolutely. So we know that there's different types of trafficking or different types of trafficking scenarios that we see, right? So one of the common ones is this boyfriend girlfriend scenario where they're meeting in person, they're grooming them into the lifestyle. I remember one of the last cases that I worked as a detective before going on to the Department of Justice was a 17-year-old girl. Did very well in school, was involved in a lot of activities and other things, but really had low self-esteem. That was her vulnerability, wanted a boyfriend. And so a 23-year-old man recognized that vulnerability while she was working one day at a local retail store. He recognized the vulnerability because simply by the way that she carried herself, right? Sometimes we forget just our physical stature can telegraph that we have low self-esteem. And so he realized that she was a good intended target. He spent a period of time grooming her, making her think that they were, in love and they were going to have a future together and all these other things before he, attempted to exploit her. We see increases in what we call peer-to-peer trafficking. So Donna talked about, this issue of sexting and people just think it's kind of normal. Well, now we're seeing 16-year-olds trying to traffic other 16-year-olds. Where is this coming from? Well, they're going online and learning how to do it, right? You can go on YouTube right now and watch tutorials on how to traffic and exploit other people. We're seeing
and
gangs.
YouTube doesn't take that down, right?
No, absolutely not. Right? Yeah, it's amazing.
Don't get us started here at Moms for America. You too, with all the censorship.
Exactly.
I mean, come on.
Exactly. We see the gangs, are heavily involved within communities. They'll target individuals that may be being bullied or may not be well accepted within the community, and they'll approach them and offer them protection. But that old adage of nothing comes for free, right? So we see it in those instances. We see traffickers approaching young men and women. It's important to remember boys can be trafficked in the sex trade as well. But approaching them at the shopping mall or at other local hangouts where they might be. So they definitely use the internet quite a bit, whether it's to initially introduce them or maybe they're using those electronic devices as ongoing communication. But that initial contact can be in the physical world as well. And again, we need to be teaching our young people how to exude confidence, right? How to be assured of themselves, because traffickers are looking for those physical signs of vulnerability.
And I know it's tough in today's culture because as a parent, as a grandparent, as a mom, a dad, you are just hyper about who your children are talking to, where they're going, how they're involved, what they're involved. But this is reality. Donna, what is CSAM? I don't know if it's CSAM. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. This is a term that you want to discuss, and how this is related to sex trafficking.
That's right. Well, I'm sure everybody on the call has heard of child pornography. And so that type of content is an actual crime scene, a sexual crime scene against a child. Well, now the movement that we're a part of here is saying, that term does not represent what is really happening to these kids. So this is the new term that we're using is child sexual abuse material. Hence, it's a lot to say. So we say CSAM. All right. Okay. So that's what that is. Now, all this, I'm going to go back to this cycle of abuse because one drives the other. Think of economics 101. All right.
Okay.
Now, all right, everybody's got their economics hat on. All right. In 2022, there were 88 million files of CSAM images and videos reported to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Now, this was around COVID time, right? Because what happens when everybody's home, people are locked down, kids are online more. Guess who else is online more? Predator. Remember that. Okay. That's an increase of 50% over 5 years. Now, what are the age of the kids being depicted in this material? 78% are under the age of 12. 63% are under the age of 8. And the growing trend has been, since I've been doing at least 25 years, toddlers and infants. So now I want you to think back to this film. What they didn't show is not only are these kids being sold for sex, you better believe they are going to capitalize and get every nickel and dime they can. So what are they going to do? They're going to photograph them. They're going to videotape them. They might rape them in what we call virtual live streaming while other predators and traffickers are watching and getting engaged. So this is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Now, one of the other things is the hardcore pornography industry that I mentioned before. This content is illegal under federal obscenity laws. What that industry has done is what we call they've started marketing barely legal content. So they'll take a 17, 18-year-old, quote unquote, legal adult female who looks pubescent or prepubescent. Now, what does that do? That whets the appetite usually of the male consumer to desire younger and younger children, hence drawing them into using child sex abuse material. Now, think about the consumer. Do you think any of this content satisfies the user? No, it does not. It whets their appetite to do what? It whets their appetite to actually abuse a child and to act out those fantasies in real life. Then the cycle continues. When they do that to be part of the child porn rings and the trafficking rings, they then not only abuse the child, they videotape it, they take pictures, and they sell it. This has now become virtual currency to get more content to get into the pedophile rings and the trafficking rings. So you've got this vicious cycle of abuse that's going over and over between trafficking, CSAM, and pornography. And enough is enough. One of the things that we're trying to do, besides getting more funding to enforce all these laws, CSAM and trafficking, the federal government has not prosecuted one case of federal obscenity. And this is driving the demand. So we are working very hard to get that to happen, to get those laws enforced.
Oh, please, God, yes, we need a miracle on that end. And Bill, I know as someone that's just listening to this, I just want to know why aren't our officers, where's the law enforcement? I mean, we know that they're getting tipped off to this. Are they able to do anything? Do they not have the staff? Do they not have the force in the field?
Yeah, that's a great question, Deb. I think that bottom line, we lack the resources right now. So without going off on a tangent on kind of how the defund the police movement has really hurt the ability to enforce crimes all across our country. But the reality is that human trafficking cases are very complex prosecutions. There were some cases that I worked that took 2+ years of investigation to be able to bring to court and hold offenders accountable. They also are cases that require unique investigative techniques. I'm sure you can imagine if you have a 16-year-old victim that has survived numerous sexual assaults, there's a lot of trauma there. There's a lot that they have experienced on top of the fact that they're just a young person. And so oftentimes law enforcement has to prioritize making sure that that survivor of trafficking is connected to appropriate resources, is stabilized, is taken care of before they can really engage them in that criminal justice process. We also need more training for our law enforcement officers. They need specialized training to be able to investigate and put these cases together. And we just don't see the level of prioritization that there needs to be. You consider the police department that I came from, human trafficking is the second largest criminal enterprise in the world. There was approximate, second to drug trafficking, there was 20 to 25 officers, detectives that specialized in narcotics investigations in my agency. There was one that specialized in human trafficking. So again, we're just not prioritizing it the way that it needs to be.
And I think this is why this conversation is so important, because we say this at Moms for America all the time. And I know you agree with this as well, Donna and Bill. Everything begins and starts in the home. So we cannot rely on the police force. We cannot rely on the government. We cannot rely on anyone else but us as parents to protect our children and to educate them and defend them. Donna, I know there's something else you want to talk about about human trafficking, because it intersects with so many other crimes that we hear about. Bill just referred to some of them in the past, but I know you had a comment on that as well.
Yes, well, I was talking about the cycle of abuse, and as part of all of this, things can escalate where a predator, in addition to trafficking and everything else, or just sexually abusing a child. Listen to that. Okay, it's called sextortion, and what happens in the cases of sextortion, which is on a huge, rise right now in the United States, is that this person will get an image of a child, whether it's self-generated. In other words, that child or that teenager has put content out there voluntarily, somehow maybe exchanged it, a girl, sent her boyfriend a nude, and then they break up, he shares it online, and it ends up online. Thing is, once anything ends up online, whether it's self-generated or not, or whether it was whether it's been retrieved basically by a predator or a trafficker, it can be used for sextortion. So in these cases, then the person that is sextorting will use that content for money, typically, to get that that young person, to send them money, or else they threaten to share the images or the videos with their parents, post it online, or do whatever with it. So it's really just a form of extortion using the sexual content. And what's interesting about this is that 90% of the victims of sextortion are teenage males. Mm. And well, I'm not sure why that is, other than they may feel like that they may have access, to money somehow. And in fact, there was a case about a year ago of a member of Congress in South Carolina whose son this happened to, and this is a very typical scenario. Someone he thought was a young girl befriended him online. It wasn't a young girl. Got him to send a picture of himself, a nude. Within a couple of hours, of course, he was being sextorted, and panicked, didn't go to his parents, scared to death, shamed, humiliated. He took his own life.
Yeah.
This ended up in the national news. So these scenarios are really happening. And Deb, just to bring it home to what you were talking about, parents have such a key role to play. In fact, they are the first line of defense, and we do a lot. We're going to get to the hope side of this, but I do have to say this: parents cannot enforce the law. Okay. Bad guys need to be put away by the rule of law. by the criminal justice system. And I think criminals are getting more justice than the victims and the survivors in these cases. And so there is a role for government. We're going to talk about our approach. There's a role for the technology community because unfortunately, big tech is not always a part of the solution, which they need to be. So, and then of course, parents being the first line of defense is absolutely key.
Yeah, so many levels to this to really make an impact. Like you said, there's so many critical elements to this. Bill, before we get into some of these solutions that Donna's going to share with us, you talk about the 3 Ps. And this is something that we want to share with our audience because this is the solution really to human trafficking. It's based on these 3 Ps.
Yeah. So the original framework to address human trafficking in the United States was built around what's called the 3 Ps, and that is prosecution, protection, and prevention. And it really hits on what we've been talking about, and that is, and I really appreciate your comments, Deb, around, we can't be reliant on just the police to be able to address this issue. In fact, maybe we should add a 4th P, right? And that's parents to this conversation.
Let's make it 4. I agree,
that's
brother.
Right. And so, but really that framework is, what are we doing on the prosecution side to hold offenders accountable, right? So increasing penalties, in some states, purchasing sex is still a misdemeanor offense, right? We've got to hold those that are facilitating it, but also those that are enabling it. We need to hold them accountable, right? Making sure, as we mentioned earlier, law enforcement are properly trained, our prosecutors have the tools and resources that they need, right? So that's kind of that prosecution ring. Protection is making sure that those that have experienced exploitation do have access to appropriate services.
Right.
That is a huge gap we have here in the United States where young people are exploited and then they either stay stuck in that cycle of exploitation or other bad things may happen to them because there is no mechanism for them to get out and seek the help that they need. So we've really got to be investing in that space. And then lastly, which I think we're going to be moving into, and that is prevention. What can we be doing to prevent human trafficking from happening in the first place? And I think that's really critical. I think a lot of experts in the field will agree that we've spent a lot of time, money, and resources investing in the prosecution, although much more needs to be done in protection, but we've really neglected prevention. And I think that's absolutely critical. And then, of course, including our parents in that conversation as a way to address this problem.
Yeah, I think I love adding the parents. Donna, prevention, as Bill just said, is obviously a huge piece of this, and Enough is Enough really is amazing in this arena. They have an award-winning curriculum for parents that prevent the online exploitation of children. This is the answer. You've got to tell us about this because I know everybody's hanging on here because they want to know, what can we do? How do we prevent this? And your website is just chocked full of great information for parents. So tell us about it.
Yes, well, thank you. When I began, we actually came up with a whole prevention strategy, what we call a 3-prong approach to preventing the online exploitation of children. And that involves all of it, right? Not just trafficking, but sexual predation, exposure to pornography, cyberbullying, and all kinds of dangers and harms associated with online gaming, social media. The Surgeon General just put out a warning that social media is harming our children. So we deal with all of this. And when we talk about prevention and the holistic strategy, this is what it looks like. And it's not 3 Ps, but it's a 3-prong approach. And we've added a 4th prong. First is public education and awareness. And that is educating, equipping, and empowering the public, mainly parents, to recognize the dangers, the harms, and to be the first line of defense. The second is, what's the role of corporate America and what is the role of big tech? They need to be more of a part of the solution than a part of the problem. That's a whole nother conversation, but we're working with Congress now to hold big tech accountable. For the years I've been doing this now, almost 30, going back to working with these tech companies to develop filtering technologies. What can we do? Because the internet is wide open. And then, of course, the role of government. Yes, we need more resources to fight human trafficking, but we also have to prosecute the pornography laws. We have to aggressively prosecute the child pornography and CSAM and all of this. It would be like trying to deal with the narcotics industry and just tackling heroin and not the rest of it, right? You can go after all of it because one fuels the other. And then the fourth part of that prong, if you will, is the role of the faith community. And so now with parents, we did build this curriculum, Internet Safety 101, and all these resources are at internetsafety101.org. And we break everything down from pornography to social media safety to online gaming to trafficking to predation, all of it, right?
Right.
And
Parents just need to go spend some time.
Live there for a
Go
while.
live there for a while. Just
There
say
for a
every
while.
night, I'm going to take a half hour. I'm going to go on that website and I'm going to figure out what those tools and those resources are so I can incorporate them into my home and share them with my children.
And here's the thing that I hope that parents are recognizing, and I say it all the time, your child is not immune. No matter how smart they are, no matter how much they may go to church youth group, maybe they're not even interested in the opposite sex, it doesn't matter. For one, if they are online and they have unrestricted internet access, they're vulnerable. And that is just the way it is. Not because they're not smart and wise, and we're going to talk about helping to build web-wise kids as well, but because the predators are smarter than they are. You cannot recognize a disguised predator. So one of the first tips that I want to give every parent, and that is this, and particularly in the online world, every single internet-enabled device you give your child, be prepared to cyber parent that device. In other words, you need to know how they're using that device, when they're using it, who they're talking to, and have conversations all the time. So if they're online every day, then have a conversation about what they're doing online every day, just like you would about what they're doing at school. Who are you talking to? Have you met anybody new? Have you tried a new online game? Have you seen anything that made you feel uncomfortable? Because what you want to do, and this is so key, is build an atmosphere of trust, because so many kids of young ages and teens, even older teens, if something happens, they're already feeling ashamed. They may already feel like they're being blamed, particularly if they're interacting with a trafficker or a predator who's going to isolate them and put the blame on them. So you want to be, as a parent, as a mom and a dad, the person that is safe, that is not going to shame them, that's going to listen and never, ever overreact. Just train yourself, no matter what you hear or what they come to with you.
Stay calm, right?
Stay calm and listen and have those conversations. But if you build the atmosphere of trust prior to a crisis, then you've got a great relationship to then be the safe person that they do come to.
I think too, as parents, like you're saying, we don't think, oh, they're at church or at school. Oh, teachers are approaching the kids. I mean, we've had this situation. We've heard this over and over again. Teachers actually, coming up to kids with sexual ideas. I mean, believe it or not, and it's happening in the church. It's happening everywhere. I mean, this is really like, it's a hypersexualized culture. Parents, grandparents, dads, moms, we all have to be in front of the situation instead of always behind. And if we don't know how to get in front of it, we've got to go to the website. We've got to understand it in all arenas of life with our children. Bill, what's your advice to our parents that are listening about protecting their children from your perspective?
I think the biggest thing that I would say is you've got to have that conversation. It's a very uncomfortable conversation to have with children. I'm a father of 6. I've, I've had it with my kids. It's not fun. In fact, I tell people, I'd rather go back to my days of kicking in doors with, bad guys on the other side than having to have that conversation. It's very scary, but we've got to. We've got to talk to them about what the realities are that are out there.
Right.
Because if we're not willing to educate them, the internet is, and the
Sure.
internet is unfortunately full of lies. And it's going to take them down a path that we as parents would be scared of. And so many of the young people that I worked with as survivors of human trafficking, they told me, I just didn't know. I didn't know what was happening to me. I didn't have the words to describe it. And then once I realized what was happening was wrong, I didn't know who to turn to. And it was mostly because people did not have those open lines of communication. And we can't expect our kids, right? We can't put the burden on our children.
They're just
come to
children.
us. Right. We can't say, hey, come to us if you feel uncomfortable. We need to regularly be talking to them and monitoring for those changes in mood and behavior and having that conversation with them. And lastly, and I'll get off my soapbox, but that is be involved in their lives. Know who their friends are, know what they're doing online, spend some time with them. I saw not that I would recommend any of us being on Twitter, but I was on Twitter the other day and I saw a post from somebody that said, encouraging parents to not play with their kids, because their kids don't want. And I said, what kind of message are we not just giving our kids today, but are we giving parents today? They have got to be involved in their children's lives. Right. Because that's the only way that they're going to effectively protect them and create those defenses before something bad happens.
I just had one comment. I went down at a comment here too, is that I think as parents, we need to find like-minded parents that our kids are hanging out around with. We need to be the ones that are just on the forefront, creating the right atmosphere in our home, in our community. And we just have to be watching them on all levels. I never apologize to my kids. I said, too bad. I don't know what everybody else is doing in their household, but we're on a tight ship over here. My biggest joy in life and my biggest is to make sure that you are okay. So we've got to do that. Donna?
Yeah, Deb, and thanks. I know you're a wonderful mom. And, and I have to tell you, I have had more moms that have done all that they know to do and still something
It still happens. Sure it does.
So you really have to think about playing offense and defense. So what we call this at Enough is Enough is rules and tools, safety rules and software tools. Now, these are not rules and tools to give your kids. No, these are rules and tools for mom and dad. Now, Bill and I talked about one of the top ones, keep lines of communication open, build an atmosphere of trust, but know who they're talking to, know what they're doing. If you're going to let them play a game or use an app, go on and use the app itself. See how it's rated. See what the age restrictions are. And I can tell you right now, they are all 13 and over. However, they don't have age verification technology in place to keep your 7-year-old off. Okay, so there's know what they're doing online and establish those rules, those house rules. We've got a list of those at our website. But I want to talk about technology. I find that parents and moms in particular, sometimes, unless they're really techno geeky, they might feel like, oh my gosh, there's just so much. And you know what? There is. Because if you've got 3 kids and they're each using 3 devices, you can't just flip a switch and turn on a silver bullet and every single device is protected all at the same time. You have to look at each device typically and go on and turn on the tools. So what are the 3 tools? The 3 that I recommend, they are musts. First of all, if you even let your child have internet access, which I do not recommend before at least here in junior high school or wait till 8th grade even for a smartphone. Okay. But okay, that's up to you. You may have a mature 11-year-old, but whenever you do introduce the internet, turn on the most restrictive filter there is. That will keep out a lot of the pornography, the CSAM, and the links to this kind of content. This is really, really important because an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? Turn on the monitoring technology. That's very different than filtering. Monitoring will allow you, the parent, to see where your child is going online, where they're attempting to go. Are they trying to break out of a filter? Have they used another network? And you will get a report. And there's free technology by most of your providers, whether it's your service provider or your wireless provider. Then you have extra off-the-shelf kinds of products that you can buy. The other feature, which I think is a must-have, is a time feature. Manage their time. Teach them from a very early age. I mean, if you let them play with your smartphone or whatever, when they're 5, this is not a toy. The computer is not a toy.
Yeah.
This is a technology device that opens up all the good and all the bad, and put limits around that at a very young age, so they realize that this is not a right. This is a privilege. And I think that the more that you can do that and then manage all the different platforms that they're using, and think about this. At Christmas time, I always go, you sure you want to get that child a smartphone or a gaming device? Are you going to look at every single game, play that game with the child, and figure out what's going on to parent that child while using that device or that game? So think about it before you just willy-nilly let them have access to all these platforms. And then once you do, even the gaming device platforms, you can turn on filtering. You can limit who they play with. Do limit who they play with. They shouldn't be able to play with anybody online, at least until that, I would say, a later teen that you don't know and approve of, and you set the password, and you don't give your kid your password. All right. A lot of this seems like common sense, and it's a lot of work, and it is a lot of work. Being a cyber parent is a lot of work. All right. But the other thing too is modeling what is expected at home. And I think one of the most important things when it comes to sexual exploitation, and I know I'm talking a lot, I'm sorry, but is for, especially if you have an intact family, a mom and a dad, to show what real, genuine love and commitment looks like, for dads to show their daughters what it's like, to how a man and a gentleman and a boy should treat you. And if you don't have that, if you're a single mom and you don't have that, then still have those conversations. Find those role models who are men, who can help them see what's it like to be treated with dignity and with respect. And teach your boys to do the same thing, because they're getting hooked on this porn. These boys, 10, 11, 8, 7 years old, and they think that abusing a woman, abusing a girl is what is expected of them. So you have to counter the pornographic lies that they're getting fed everywhere, over and over and over again. But you can do it because you are their steward, and it's a God-given right and an opportunity to parent. And you know, we're here to help you at Enough is Enough.
Yeah. Couple of questions here, Donna. This was a comment as well, that she was a helicopter mom, and it still happened to her oldest daughter. Education is key, and that's obviously what we're talking about, is having all these important discussions with our kids. It's uncomfortable, like Bill said, but it is very necessary.
Yes, and I think, you know, that's true. And Deb, you mentioned, you know, have a community of moms, a community of dads. We even have a parent buddy checklist. You know, if you can think of technology as your friend. So let's just say your daughter is on social media. Find out all the other moms whose daughters are on social media and in her circle, and do mama bear circles. Watch them.
Oh, that's what I say to my friends. You see anything with my kids, I'm watching your kids. You know, that's right. We've all got to be in on this, helping.
Right. Yeah. And talk together and say, hey, you guys are online. Well, mama bears are looking. Daddy bears are watching you, because we want to make sure that you're using the technology in a safe way And when we go back to all these tools that I talked about, I don't believe in spying on your kids. I really don't. I think you tell them, these are the tools that I am using to
Right.
help manage your access so that you're safe. And the technology is my friend and it's your friend, and this is what we're going to use.
Was that the parent buddy checklist? Is that what you just referred to, Donna?
Mm-hmm.
And is that on your
Yeah.
website too?
It's in the prevention section. We've got a lot of information in that prevention section. And we also, in each area, we've got what we call parent guides. They're little quick guides where we go through what are the dangers of, say, cyberbullying or mobile technologies. What are the warning signs? What are the red flags to pay attention to? We have conversation starters on these quick guides. And then we've got all the safety information, but we've also got an entire section in the prevention section at Internet Safety 101 with video. So you can even look at some of our video, our little 2 to 3 minute video clips, and use some of those as conversation starters. Or just when you see something in a headline, you know, kids love to follow celebrities and this, that, and the other. Use those as conversation starters. This film is a good conversation starter.
A lot of these questions are asking about your resources. So again, you just highlighted that so our parents can go ahead and just see all that at Enough is Enough or enough.org and internetsafety101.org. The other question here, and I was just going to give this to Bill, is this question says that they know of a person's child was taken at their school, was abducted, and how horrific that was for their community.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you know, these types of incidences do happen. Or, you know, we mentioned earlier that the exploitation at the beginning, the child's at home, but then as things, you know, progress, that child could disappear, go missing. Certainly very traumatic for the community. There are things that I think, you know, first and foremost, we need to support the families. But one of the things I also think is you need to rally around that situation so that when that child is found, when that child does need to come back and integrate into the community, that they find a very warm and welcoming situation.
Yeah.
So often, because people don't quite understand what is happening, the child can very much feel isolated or very ashamed of what happened to them, right? Donna was talking earlier about a mother and her story. You know, she runs an organization called the Parent Coalition to End Human Trafficking. And as a mother of a survivor, she works with families now whose child has either gone missing or whose child's been identified as being a victim of human trafficking, and helping them integrate back into the family, because that's so critically important. That they do have a loving support network to come back to.
One other question, Don, I wanted to ask you just for your advice to the parents that are weighing in here is it's difficult to tell your child no phone, no social media, no internet, no this. We have to be giving them good opportunities and good other solutions, but maybe just some advice to the parents that are listening on how to deal with a culture that is wrapped around media, and we're saying less media. And, you know, it's different now. Kids aren't even outside playing basketball or baseball anymore, right? Riding bikes, where everything's online.
That's right. And so that's a really good point. And I do think, I mean, obviously, look, the internet's here to stay. Kids are using the internet, they're using technology in the classroom. All right. So I think if have these conversations that it's not the technology necessarily that is bad, even though I now have a different opinion on this, because we know, for instance, that social media companies are purposefully rigging their algorithms so that they're addictive and that they're drawing these kids in knowingly that there is content there that is harming them. Like, for instance, on Instagram, there are hundreds of thousands of eating disorder sites, and there's that kind of thing. But I think if you have the conversations, and don't necessarily say no computer, no internet, no gaming, but it's introducing the technology at the right time in their life. And as you introduce it, then okay, we can start with, say you've got an 8-year-old, they want a phone. Well, you can't have a smartphone, I don't think, but you can have a gab phone where you can call your grandparents, you can call your friends, you can call us at home, but it's not connected to the internet. And then when you get to a certain age, then we can get you a smartphone, but we're going to put the filtering on there. We're going to put monitoring and time controls on there and buddy lists and that kind of thing. Same thing with a gaming device. I've got 4 grandchildren, 5, another one on the way. And whoa, as a grandparent, grandparents out there, you've got a voice, but not like you want sometimes. But it's okay, start with the games, but just let them play with people that you agree with. And then you go and look at the gaming sites, look at the ratings, make sure that they're not connected to something sexual, because some of them are, especially as they get older. So look at the ratings are there. Same thing with social media. You've got a fallback right now. If they're under 13, they're not supposed to be on these social media sites, period. Okay. But in the conversation with social media, just as an FYI, all of these social media sites were developed for college age students and above. All right. They were never meant for young ever. Okay. Then they lowered the age to 13. Then Instagram tried to lower it to under 13 and we fought them hard. We had a petition. By the way, we have a lot of petitions at enough.org and Internet Safety 101 where we would love your support and help there, because we know that going after some of these, whether it's DOJ or
we want to help with that with Moms for America for sure.
Yes, thank you. And we would love that. But again, the safety information is at internetsafety101.org. And balance that digital time with physical time. Have those technology free zones. No technology when we're having dinner or whatever. You decide, right?
You decide, yes.
You decide as the parent so that they get used to what we all grew up with. We grew up with interacting and or find another game. Like one of my grandchildren, they were getting really hooked on a particular game. I can't remember which one it was. So he happens to be a soccer player and football. So they said no to that game. They had to break that particular almost addiction as it was happening and move over to football online or something. So there are ways that they can still use technology, but if you see them getting into some issues here, a problem here, obsessive compulsive behavior here, pivot to offline stuff or pivot to something more online that might be more appropriate.
And my humble opinion is start strict. 8 o'clock, the phone's on the counter, never in your bedroom. Always start tough. You can always adjust, but when you start out soft, forget it. You can't, it's just a downward spiral. So we just always started out, here's our rules and this is where we're starting, and we can always make exceptions. And I think parents have to be in the driver's seat. And I'm not minimalizing this because this is a tough culture. I mean, this is some tough stuff out here. So thank you so much. I just want to make sure that if there's any other comments that you and Bill want to make before we close out our webinar, I want to give you that open space to talk to those that are here.
Yeah, I'll just quickly say, first of all, thank you. I mean, this is it's incredible. Thank you for providing this forum for us to really have this conversation. If we're going to be truly impactful in combating human trafficking, we've got to have these conversations.
Right.
And we can't just have the conversation one time, right? It needs to be something that is ongoing. So I would challenge all the moms and dads, the parents that have joined us here today, to absolutely look at the resources, educate yourself even further. But I challenge you to go and share something that you have learned today with at least 3 other individuals so that we can spread the word, right? So we can have that exponential effect. So that's my challenge today. And we're always here to support and help. So don't ever hesitate to reach out.
Yeah, and I just, that's a big ditto and echo to Bill and Deb, to you and the whole teams at Moms for America. You all have just been a force and we thank you. And I mean, you're doing so much all across the culture wars that we're in. And it's hard raising a child in this culture. It really
Mhm.
is. But you made the point so well in the beginning that it starts at home. And if we start young and build
Mhm.
those boundaries in, those expectations, and model love,
Yeah.
model what it's like to show someone dignity and respect. And
Yeah.
also, one thing that I didn't mention, and that is this, let your children know, and your teens, especially, and your preteens are really such a vulnerable age group, that even if something that is not happening to them, if they see something happening with someone that is their friend or just a peer, to tell you, to
Mm.
tell someone, because sometimes it is that peer that is the one that can actually become that first line of defense and speak in to that situation. And
Yeah.
so this is really, really important, and not to be afraid. You could save someone's life, and let your child know that. The best way to be a good friend is to help protect that friend who may be drawn
Yeah.
into a situation that is dangerous and
Mhm.
very unsafe and could ruin their lives. So
Mhm.
this is so important. Again, keeping those lines of communication open, and help them to understand that they're part of their own solution, and they're part of the first line of defense to help protect other kids and even their younger siblings.
And what a great cause. What a righteous challenge to our kids. Not only are we concerned about you, but you should be concerned about your friends. And doesn't that give them purpose? I mean, I love that. And again, I'm just going to say this. Hey, our kids were born for such a time as this. So there's
Amen.
no mistakes. They were born in a culture where they can be the warriors, but we just got to do all that we can, and resources like this, Donna. Thank you, Bill, for what you've done, fighting against the sickest of sick people, and saving the children one home at a time. Thank you so much. Again, the website is enough.org. And then it's internetsafety101.org, and it's momsforamerica.us. We have resources, and we are here to support you and all the cultural challenges that it is as parents and grandparents and as Americans. I mean, right? We want to save our country.
Yeah.
This is going in a sick place. So we've all got to rise up. If you don't have children in this culture, you don't have little ones, boy, do we need your help more than ever. And we're going to work with Enough is Enough on these petitions and this legislation. We're going to do all that we can.